Many people spend their entire lives chasing after a fleeting shadow, running through fields of gold and valleys of tears, searching for that one elusive thing called happiness. It feels like a beautiful butterfly resting on a flower, which immediately flies away the moment a hand reaches out to touch it, leaving the palm completely empty. Friends often look at the horizon, hoping that the next destination, the next achievement, or the next person will finally bring that profound sense of peace. The more energy everyone invests in tracking it down, the further away it seems to drift, like a mirage in a vast, burning desert. This continuous journey brings so much exhaustion, creating deep grooves of fatigue on faces and heavy burdens inside hearts that just want to rest. It is quite natural to wonder why a goal so universally desired remains so intensely difficult to grasp, even for those who possess everything the world deems necessary for a perfect life. The world teaches everyone to look outward, to accumulate, to build bigger structures, to gather more recognition, and to tie joy to external conditions. People believe that once a certain milestone is reached, once a specific financial target is met, or once a particular relationship is secured, the door to perpetual joy will swing open. Yet, the moment those things are achieved, the initial thrill dissolves into thin air, replaced by an even larger, more demanding desire or a paralyzing fear of losing what was just gained. This endless cycle resembles a person drinking salty water to quench a burning thirst, where each sip only intensifies the craving, making the throat drier and the mind more restless. True contentment cannot be captured like a prize, because it is not an object hidden in some faraway corner of the earth, waiting to be discovered by a lucky traveler. It is a state of being, a quiet resonance within, which becomes completely obscured by the very noise of searching for it. During the time of the Buddha, a young monk who had just joined the Sangha found himself deeply troubled by this exact dilemma, feeling that despite his constant meditation, true peace remained light years away. He walked through the quiet forest tracks, watching the older disciples sitting serenely under the trees, wondering what secret formula they possessed that he seemed to lack entirely. One afternoon, he approached an elder monk who was calmly sweeping the path, where dried leaves fell as softly as golden snow in the gentle breeze. The young man asked why the joy of the practice felt so distant, why the harder he tried to concentrate, the more his mind scattered like wild horses on a stormy plain. The elder monk stopped his broom, looked at the young disciple with eyes full of gentle warmth, and pointed to a small stream flowing nearby. He explained that when someone tries too hard to catch the water in their hands, squeezing their fingers tightly together, the water leaks out instantly through the cracks, leaving nothing but damp skin. However, if the hands are kept open, relaxed, and placed gently into the flowing current, the water fills the palms effortlessly, staying there as long as the hands remain calm and receptive. The search itself often creates a subtle wall of resistance, because the act of looking for something implies a deep, painful belief that it is currently missing. When everyone constantly focuses on what is lacking, the mind trains itself to see scarcity everywhere, overlooking the quiet miracles unfolding right in front of their eyes. The warmth of the morning sun hitting the skin, the rhythm of a steady breath, the sound of rain tapping against a window pane, all these become invisible when the gaze is fixed on a distant future. People postpone their current joy, treating the present moment as a mere stepping stone, a bridge to be crossed as quickly as possible to reach a mythical land of tomorrow. This habit of living in anticipation creates an inner poverty, where a person can be surrounded by abundance yet feel completely bankrupt inside. The constant rush to find happiness ensures that it is never experienced, because experience requires presence, a willingness to slow down and fully inhabit the here and now. There is a beautiful story about a wealthy merchant who lived in a bustling city during ancient times, a man who possessed warehouses filled with precious silks, rare spices, and shimmering gems. Despite his immense fortune, his heart felt like a hollow cave, echoing with a persistent sense of dissatisfaction that no amount of luxury could ever soothe. He traveled across provinces, consulted renowned scholars, bought the finest works of art, and even built a magnificent garden with fountains that whispered sweet melodies. Still, every night, he would lie awake under his silk blankets, staring at the ceiling, feeling an unbearable weight of emptiness pressing down on his chest. Hearing of a wise sage who lived a simple life on the slopes of a misty mountain, the merchant decided to journey there, convinced that this man held the ultimate secret to finding lasting joy. He packed a chest with his most valuable gold coins, loaded it onto a sturdy mule, and climbed the winding rocky paths until he reached a humble straw hut surrounded by wild flowers. The sage was sitting on a flat stone, watching the white clouds drift lazily across the deep blue sky, looking completely at ease with the universe. The merchant rushed forward, bowing deeply, and placed the heavy chest of gold at the feet of the wise man, begging for the formula to erase his chronic unhappiness. He explained how much he had searched, how many lands he had visited, and how much wealth he had accumulated, all in a desperate bid to find that one elusive feeling. The sage looked at the chest, then at the exhausted face of the merchant, and suddenly, without a single word of explanation, he grabbed the chest, scooped it up into his arms, and ran down the mountain trail. The merchant was completely stunned for a second, then, realizing his precious gold was being stolen, he screamed in anger and ran after the old man as fast as his legs could carry him. He stumbled over rocks, tore his expensive robes on thorny bushes, gasping for breath, crying out in absolute panic at the thought of losing his treasure. The sage, knowing the mountain paths perfectly, ran in a wide circle, returned to the clearing outside the hut, placed the chest back on the exact same spot, and sat down calmly. A few minutes later, the merchant burst into the clearing, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding like a drum, seeing his chest sitting safely on the ground. He threw himself onto the wooden box, hugging it tightly to his chest, weeping with an overwhelming sense of relief, feeling the happiest he had felt in decades. The sage smiled gently, asking the merchant how he felt at that very moment, to which the merchant replied that he felt incredibly blessed, joyful, and deeply grateful. The wise man then softly pointed out that the chest had not changed, the gold inside was exactly the same as it was 10 minutes ago, and no new wealth had been added to his life. The only thing that had changed was the merchant's perspective, because he had temporarily lost what he took for granted, and in that sudden space of loss, he finally appreciated what he already possessed. Human beings often fail to recognize the treasure they hold in their hands until it is threatened, spending their days looking at what others have, comparing their own chapters to someone else's highlight reel. This constant comparison is a thief that sneaks into the mind, stealing the sweetness of current blessings, replacing them with the bitter weeds of envy and inadequacy. Someone might have a simple house that protects them from the wind and rain, yet they feel miserable because a neighbor has built a towering mansion with gilded gates. Another might have a body that functions beautifully, allowing them to walk, see, and hear, yet they suffer deeply because their appearance does not match the changing standards of popular beauty. The mind creates a complex web of conditions for joy, stating that one must be rich, famous, young, or perfectly healthy before they can allow themselves to feel content. By setting these strict conditions, people lock themselves into a self-made prison, throwing away the key, waiting for a perfect day that may never arrive. The nature of the world is impermanence, a truth that the Buddha emphasized in almost every teaching, showing that all conditioned things are constantly flowing, changing, and dissolving. Trying to build a permanent house of happiness out of the shifting sands of external circumstances is a project destined for heartbreak, like trying to carve a sculpture out of a melting block of ice. Wealth can vanish overnight through a sudden turn of fortune, health can transition into illness with a single heartbeat, and relationships can change as people grow apart or leave this world. When joy is anchored entirely to these fluctuating things, the mind becomes like a small boat tossed violently on a stormy sea, living in perpetual anxiety, terrified of the next wave. True stability comes from understanding this fluid nature of reality, learning to enjoy the pleasant winds when they blow, without desperately clinging to them when they inevitably change direction. In the records of the ancient world, there is a touching account of an elderly woman who spent decades looking after a large family, her hands calloused from hard work, her back bent from years of labor. She had known deep poverty, had lost loved ones to wars and diseases, yet everyone who encountered her was struck by the radiant, peaceful smile that always graced her wrinkled face. A traveler once stopped at her village, amazed by her cheerful demeanor, and asked how she could remain so bright after living through so many hardships and losses. The old woman laughed softly, a sound like silver bells, and said that every morning when she woke up, she realized she had two choices regarding how to spend her day. She could either spend it focusing on the aches in her joints and the people who were gone, or she could spend it appreciating the taste of her simple rice, the laughter of her grandchildren, and the vivid colors of the morning glories blooming by her door. She chose the second path every single day, recognizing that life is a mixture of joy and sorrow, and that waiting for all sorrow to vanish before smiling is like waiting for the ocean to stop waving before taking a swim. This simple wisdom highlights the difference between pursuing happiness as an external goal and cultivating it as an internal capacity, a muscle of appreciation that can be strengthened through daily awareness. When people stop sprinting toward an imaginary finish line, they suddenly notice the richness of the landscape they are currently walking through, discovering hidden gems in the most ordinary moments. The mind becomes less reactive, less dependent on the praise of others, and more grounded in a quiet sense of self-worth that does not require validation from the outside world. It is the freedom of a person who has stepped off the treadmill of endless desire, content with what is sufficient, finding joy not in having more, but in needing less. This shift from accumulation to appreciation is the grand turning point in the spiritual journey, where the frantic search ends, and the deep, silent river of peace begins to flow. The teachings of the Enlightened One always remind everyone that the mind is the forerunner of all states, the creator of our reality, shaping the world we experience with every thought, word, and action. If the mind is cluttered with unfulfilled desires, regrets about the past, and anxieties about the future, even a palace will feel like a cramped, uncomfortable dungeon. Conversely, if the mind is spacious, kind, and anchored in the present, a simple hut or a seat beneath a tree becomes a sanctuary of supreme bliss. The external world is merely a mirror reflecting our inner landscape, and trying to change the reflection without clearing the dirt from the glass is an exercise in total futility. Therefore, the spiritual practice is not about transforming the outer world into a flawless paradise, but about transforming the inner space so that it can meet whatever the world brings with balance, clarity, and kindness. A beautiful story from the text describes a king who ruled over a prosperous realm, a monarch who had won many battles, expanded his borders, and commanded the absolute obedience of millions of subjects. Yet, behind the thick stone walls of his grand palace, surrounded by guards and court musicians, the king felt a deep, gnawing restlessness that prevented him from enjoying his victories. He could not sleep soundly, constantly fearing conspiracies, worrying about his treasury, and feeling an inner void that no feast, no wine, and no flattery could ever hope to fill. One evening, unable to bear the heavy silence of his chambers, he disguised himself in plain clothes and walked out into the city streets, seeking to understand how ordinary people lived. He wandered into a poor quarter near the river, where the houses were made of mud and thatch, and the people worked from dawn until dusk just to secure a single meal. As he walked past a small, dilapidated shelter, he heard the sound of sweet singing, a melody so full of joy and unadulterated delight that it stopped him dead in his tracks. Peering through a crack in the wooden door, he saw a shoemaker, a man in tattered clothes, sitting on a low stool, repairing an old leather boot by the dim light of a single oil lamp. The shoemaker was singing with his whole heart, his face glowing with genuine contentment, while his wife sat nearby, spinning cotton, smiling warmly at her husband. On their table sat a simple dinner of coarse bread and a bowl of clear water, yet the atmosphere in that humble room was richer and more harmonious than anything the king had ever felt in his golden halls. The king was deeply perplexed by this sight, wondering how a man with absolutely nothing to his name could possess the very treasure that he, the ruler of the land, had been tracking down in vain for so many years. The next day, the king returned to the palace and ordered his ministers to summon the shoemaker to the royal court, wanting to discover the source of this mysterious, vibrant happiness. When the poor artisan arrived, bowing respectfully before the throne, the king asked him directly what wealth he possessed, what secret knowledge he held, that allowed him to sing so joyfully in the midst of poverty. The shoemaker smiled humbly and replied that he had no wealth, no secret knowledge, and no grand plans for the future, but only a simple daily routine that filled his heart. He explained that each morning, he woke up and thanked the universe for another day of life, then he worked hard to repair whatever boots were brought to his shop, earning just enough coins to buy bread for his family. In the evening, he returned home, shared the bread with his beloved wife, sang songs to express his gratitude for their health, and slept deeply, leaving the worries of tomorrow to tomorrow. This encounter left a deep impression on the king, revealing that the shoemaker's peace came precisely from his lack of entanglement with complex desires, his ability to fully live in the reality of each passing hour. The king realized that his own suffering arose from his endless attachments, his constant need to control the future, to protect his status, and to expand his power, which kept his mind in a state of perpetual warfare. True wealth is not measured by how much a person owns, but by how deeply they can appreciate the simple, unvarnished truth of existence, free from the heavy armor of pride and ambition. When everyone learns to drop the heavy baggage of who they think they should be, they open up a space to experience the beauty of who they actually are, right here, right now. The tendency to look for happiness in the future is a psychological habit that many people carry from childhood, always believing that the next stage of life will be the one where real living begins. Children wish to be teenagers, teenagers long for the freedom of adulthood, young adults strain to secure a career, and working professionals look forward to the peace of retirement. This constant deferral means that life is always happening elsewhere, never in the room where a person is currently standing, turning existence into a series of rehearsals for a show that never actually opens. When retirement finally comes, the mind, having been trained for decades to look ahead, often finds itself trapped in boredom or looking back at the past with deep, bittersweet regret. The present moment is the only arena where life can actually be lived, where a breath can be felt, where a sunset can be enjoyed, and where true peace can be realized. In the old monastic traditions, there is a tale of a traveling monk who was walking through a mountainous region when he suddenly encountered a fierce tiger, which began to chase him with terrifying speed. The monk ran to the edge of a steep cliff and, seeing no other option, caught hold of the root of a wild vine and swung himself down over the precipice to escape the beast. As he hung there, suspended in mid-air, he looked up and saw the tiger growling at him from the top of the cliff, its sharp teeth glistening in the sunlight. He then looked down and saw a jagged rocky abyss far below, where another wild animal was waiting patiently for him to fall to his demise. To make matters worse, two small mice, one white and one black, emerged from a crevice in the rock face and began to slowly gnaw away at the very vine root that was holding him up. In that moment of absolute peril, surrounded by danger from above, below, and at the very source of his support, the monk noticed a wild strawberry growing out of a crack in the cliff face right next to him. It was a single, ripe, bright red berry, glistening with morning dew, looking incredibly vibrant against the gray stone of the mountain. With his free hand, the monk reached out, plucked the strawberry, put it into his mouth, chewed it slowly, and thought to himself how remarkably sweet and delicious it tasted. This classic story, told in various ways through the generations, perfectly illustrates the essence of mindful presence in the face of life's inherent fragility. The white and black mice represent day and night, the relentless march of time that is constantly chewing away at the thread of human life, drawing everyone closer to the inevitable end. The tiger above and the abyss below represent the unavoidable challenges, changes, and physical mortality that form the background of every single human existence. Yet, even in the midst of this fragile situation, the monk did not allow fear of the future or regret about his predicament to steal the exquisite sweetness of that one strawberry. Most people are so paralyzed by the metaphorical tigers and mice in their lives that they completely miss the strawberries, passing by countless moments of sweetness because they are gripped by anxiety. They forget that life is always a temporary arrangement, a brief spark in the vast darkness of time, and that its value lies not in its duration, but in the depth of our awareness while it lasts. When someone embraces this truth, they stop demanding that life be perfect, safe, or permanent before they allow themselves to taste its joys, finding beauty even in the most precarious circumstances. The mind shifts from a state of frantic defense to a state of soft, appreciative openness, welcoming each experience as a unique gift that will never happen in exactly the same way again. This openness brings a profound lightness of spirit, allowing a person to walk through the world with a gentle smile, unburdened by the desperate need for security. The pursuit of joy through material gain often leads to an inner hardening, where people become blind to the subtle, interconnected tapestry of life, viewing everything through the narrow lens of personal utility. They look at an ancient forest and see only timber, look at a flowing river and see only power, and look at another human being and see only a tool for their own advancement. This utilitarian mindset isolates a person from the deep currents of empathy and community, creating a lonely world where they are always on guard, always calculating, always protecting their borders. True happiness is inherently relational, expanding when it is shared, deepening when it flows outward to alleviate the burdens of others, like a lamp that lights another lamp without losing any of its own brilliance. When everyone shifts their focus from what they can get from the world to what they can contribute to it, they discover a fountain of joy that never runs dry. An inspiring story from the early Buddhist texts concerns a woman named Kisa Gautami, who experienced the agonizing pain of losing her young child, a tragedy that shattered her mind with grief. Refusing to accept the reality of death, she carried the lifeless body of her son from house to house through the town, begging her neighbors for medicine that could bring him back to life. The townspeople looked at her with deep pity and sorrow, realizing that her grief had clouded her understanding, and they told her that no medicine in the world could restore life to a dead body. Desperate and weeping, she eventually guided her steps to the monastery where the Buddha was staying, crying out to the great teacher to heal her beloved child. The Buddha, looking at her with boundless compassion, did not lecture her on the philosophy of impermanence or tell her to stop crying, knowing that a broken heart needs gentle medicine, not rigid intellectual arguments. He told her that he could indeed prepare a medicine to help her, but he required a single ingredient to make it effective, a handful of mustard seeds from a household where no one had ever died. Kisa Gautami felt a sudden spark of hope ignite in her chest, and she immediately ran back into the town, knocking on the first door she found, asking if they had any mustard seeds. The family replied that they had plenty of seeds, but when she asked if anyone had ever died in that house, they sighed and said that the living were few, but the dead were many, for they had lost a grandfather just the previous year. She thanked them and moved to the next house, but there she found that a young daughter had passed away, and at the third house, a loyal servant had died, and so it went throughout the entire city. No matter which door she knocked on, whether wealthy mansions or poor huts, she encountered the same story of loss, the same tears, and the same memories of departed loved ones. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the streets, a profound realization dawned upon her weary mind, washing away the fever of her isolated grief. She understood that her sorrow was not a unique curse visited upon her alone, but a shared thread that bound every single human being together in the fabric of existence. Every family had wept, every heart had broken, and death was an inevitable part of the landscape of life, a truth that could not be fought with denial or anger. Her heart opened up to a universal empathy, a deep compassion for all the suffering beings around her, which dissolved the tight knot of her personal agony, allowing her to lay her child down to rest with dignity. She returned to the Buddha, not with demands for a miracle, but with a peaceful, clear mind, ready to learn the path that leads beyond sorrow, finding comfort in the shared brotherhood of human experience. This poignant story teaches everyone that when we stop viewing our personal difficulties as an isolated injustice, we connect with a deeper reservoir of human resilience and collective wisdom. Happiness is not a life completely free from pain, but a life where pain is met with understanding, kindness, and a broad perspective that embraces the whole of reality. When someone stops fighting the natural flow of life, stopping their resistance to the inevitable shadows, they discover that the light becomes much more beautiful and meaningful. They no longer see challenges as enemies to be destroyed, but as teachers that refine the soul, deepening the capacity for love, patience, and profound stillness. This acceptance brings a durable peace, an inner sanctuary that remains completely undisturbed even when the world outside is undergoing turbulent shifts. The constant desire to be somewhere else, to be someone else, or to have something else is the primary engine of human restlessness, keeping the mind in a state of chronic dissatisfaction. It is like a person who sits in a beautiful garden but cannot enjoy the flowers because they are constantly worrying about whether the weeds will grow back next week. This anxious anticipation prevents the beauty of the present from touching the heart, turning life into a series of tasks to be completed rather than an experience to be savored. When everyone learns the art of simply stopping, of pausing the inner machine of ambition for just a few moments each day, they experience an immediate drop in stress levels. The mind settles down like muddy water left undisturbed in a clear glass, allowing clarity to emerge naturally without any forced effort or strenuous concentration. There is a charming story about a young fish swimming in the vast, deep ocean, who became obsessed with the idea of finding the legendary thing called the sea, which he had heard about in songs. He swam up and down the coral reefs, asking every creature he met where this magnificent sea could be found, complaining that his current surroundings were just boring, salty water. He met an old, wise turtle who was resting near a sunlit rock, and the young fish eagerly asked for directions to the great ocean, expressing his frustration at his fruitless search. The turtle smiled, his eyes twinkling with ancient humor, and told the young fish that he was currently swimming in the very sea he was looking for, that it surrounded him, sustained him, and was his very home. The young fish looked around, saw only the familiar water, felt disappointed by the answer, and swam away to continue his search elsewhere, unable to see the forest for the trees. Like that young fish, human beings are often swimming in an ocean of simple miracles, yet they miss them entirely because they are looking for a spectacular, cinematic version of happiness. They look for fireworks, grand declarations, and dramatic shifts, ignoring the quiet, steady warmth of a life lived with awareness and gratitude. The ability to sit quietly, to feel the air entering and leaving the lungs, to feel the solid ground beneath the feet, this is the foundation of true, unshakable contentment. It does not require a large bank account, a prestigious title, or the approval of a crowd, but simply a willing heart that knows how to say thank you to the present moment. This gratitude is a powerful transformative force, which instantly turns what everyone already has into more than enough, creating an inner wealth that no economic downturn can ever diminish. When people understand that happiness is a choice of focus rather than a result of fortune, they stop playing the role of a victim, taking full responsibility for their internal atmosphere. They recognize that while they cannot always control the events of the outer world, they have absolute authority over how they choose to interpret and respond to those events. This realization brings a tremendous sense of liberation, breaking the chains of dependency on external praise, material comfort, and perfect conditions. A person becomes like a deep, quiet mountain lake, reflecting the passing clouds and the bright stars perfectly, yet remaining still and serene at its depths, untouched by the winds that ruffle its surface. This depth is what everyone is truly searching for, a place of safety and peace within themselves that can never be stolen, compromised, or destroyed by the changing tides of time. In the old accounts of the desert seekers, a traveler once asked a guide how to find the path to the true oasis, since the maps they carried seemed to lead only to empty dunes. The guide replied that the secret was not to look for the oasis on a map, but to listen to the birds that flew overhead, for they always knew where the sweet water flowed, even when it was hidden beneath the burning sands. The birds represent the natural qualities of the mind, its inherent kindness, its capacity for wonder, and its spontaneous joy, which are often buried under the heavy sands of conceptual thinking. When someone learns to quiet the noisy intellect, to drop the elaborate arguments about what life should be, they begin to hear the soft songs of these inner birds, guiding them to the water. The oasis is never as far away as it seems, requiring not a long journey through external space, but a simple inward shift, a soft opening of the heart to the simple truth of the current breath. This inward journey is not a selfish withdrawal from the world, but a process of gathering the scattered fragments of our attention, bringing them back home so we can engage with life from a place of wholeness. When a person is whole within themselves, they no longer approach others with a begging bowl, demanding love, attention, or validation to fill their inner void. Instead, they approach the world with an overflowing cup, ready to offer love, ready to listen deeply, and ready to share their peace with anyone who crosses their path. This transformation changes the very nature of human relationships, turning them from arenas of mutual expectation into sanctuaries of mutual support and celebration. The heavy air of conflict lifts, replaced by a light, harmonious breeze that makes every interaction sweet, clean, and deeply life-affirming. The great mistake is to treat peace as a commodity to be acquired, a destination to be reached, or a trophy to be displayed, when it is actually the natural state of a mind that has stopped fighting reality. Every time someone lets go of a grievance, drops a comparison, or forgives a past mistake, a layer of dust is wiped away from the mirror of the soul, allowing its natural brilliance to shine through. This process of letting go is the true secret of the spiritual path, a path not of adding more things to our lives, but of peeling away the unnecessary burdens we have carried for so long. It is like a sculptor who looks at a rough block of marble and does not try to add anything to it, but carefully chips away the excess stone until the beautiful figure hidden within is revealed. The joy everyone seeks is already there, waiting patiently beneath the layers of anxiety, desire, and confusion, ready to blossom the moment we stop running away from it. There was once a quiet village situated at the foot of a verdant hill, where the inhabitants lived simple lives, farming the land, weaving cloth, and sharing their harvest with one another. In this village, there was a well known for its incredibly pure, sweet water, which had sustained the community for generations, providing refreshment to weary travelers and local farmers alike. Over time, as the village grew more prosperous, the people began to build larger houses, paving the roads with stone, and spending their days competing to see who could accumulate the most exquisite possessions. In their rush to build wealth, they neglected the old well, allowing weeds to choke its edges, and letting mud and fallen leaves clog the clear spring that fed it from deep within the earth. Eventually, the water turned bitter and murky, yet instead of cleaning the well, the villagers began to buy expensive bottled water from distant towns, complaining about the cost and the difficulty of transporting it. One day, an old wanderer who had visited the village many years before returned, carrying nothing but a walking stick and an empty wooden bowl, his face calm and unbothered by the dust of the road. He went straight to the old well, intending to drink, but found it abandoned, filled with dark sediment, while the villagers stood nearby, arguing about the rising price of water from the north. The wanderer did not join their argument, nor did he lecture them on their negligence, but instead, he rolled up his sleeves, knelt down by the stone rim, and began to patiently scoop out the mud with his bare hands. A few curious children stopped to watch him, then a few young men, feeling a prick of shame, joined in, and soon a large group was working together, clearing away the decayed leaves, pulling out the choking weeds, and scrubbing the stone walls. By the time the moon rose, casting its soft silver light over the hill, the hidden spring bubbled up with fresh energy, filling the well with crystal clear, sweet water that reflected the stars perfectly. The villagers tasted the water and were amazed to find that it was far superior to any expensive drink they had imported from afar, realizing that the treasure they needed had been beneath their feet the entire time. They had spent so much money, energy, and time looking for refreshment outside their borders, forgetting that the primary source of their vitality was already in their possession, merely buried under their own neglect. This simple truth applies beautifully to the human heart, which possesses an innate spring of pure, unadulterated joy that becomes clogged by the mud of endless ambition, worry, and distractions. The solution is not to travel to distant lands or to acquire more external goods, but to do the humble work of clearing away the inner debris, allowing the natural clarity of the mind to emerge. When the mud is removed, the water runs clear on its own, without any need for artificial flavorings, decorations, or complicated ceremonies. The rush of modern life creates a constant background noise that prevents people from hearing the soft whispers of their own hearts, keeping them in a state of high-alert survival mode. Everyone is so busy responding to messages, tracking trends, and managing schedules that they rarely find the time to simply sit still and do absolutely nothing for 15 minutes. This lack of quiet space starves the soul, leaving it dry and fragile, highly susceptible to the winds of anxiety and dissatisfaction that blow through society. When someone intentionally carves out a small sanctuary of silence in their day, stepping off the merry-go-round of productivity, they give their nervous system a chance to recalibrate. They discover that the sky does not fall when they stop working, that the world continues to spin without their constant intervention, and that there is a deep comfort in simply existing. This comfort is the birthright of every living being, a fundamental peace that does not have to be earned through outstanding achievements, social status, or moral perfection. It is the simple joy of being alive, of experiencing the universe through the windows of the senses, a privilege that is so easily forgotten in the daily struggle for survival. When everyone looks at life through this lens of pure privilege, their interactions with others become infused with a gentle, unforced kindness that softens the hardest hearts. They no longer see people as competitors to be outdone or as audience members to be impressed, but as fellow travelers sharing a brief, beautiful journey through time. This sense of shared journey dissolves the thick walls of isolation, creating a warm, supportive atmosphere where everyone can breathe a little easier and smile a little more frequently. In the old collections of wisdom, it is told that a student approached a master who was tending a small vegetable garden, asking how one could maintain a peaceful mind when the world was full of chaos and injustice. The master did not look up from his work, but simply pointed to a large, ripe pumpkin growing on a vine nearby, its golden skin dusty with earth yet perfectly solid and round. He asked the student to consider how the pumpkin grew so large and beautiful, whether it spent its days arguing with the wind, worrying about the rain, or trying to look like the cabbages in the next row. The student replied that the pumpkin simply stayed connected to its vine, absorbed the sunlight, drank the water from the soil, and grew naturally according to its own inner design, without any anxiety. The master smiled, dusted off his hands, and said that human beings would be much happier if they followed the example of the pumpkin, staying rooted in their true nature, absorbing the simple blessings of each day, without constantly comparing themselves to others. The constant desire to modify our circumstances, to make them match an idealized picture in our heads, is a major source of internal friction, like trying to swim upstream against a powerful river current. True intelligence lies in knowing when to effort and when to yield, when to take action and when to simply flow with the natural rhythm of events, trusting that everything has its own season. When a person yields to reality, they do not become passive or indifferent, but rather, they conserve their energy, directing it with precision when the right moment arrives, like a skilled surfer waiting for the perfect wave. This alignment with the natural order brings a wonderful sense of ease, eliminating the exhausting struggle that comes from trying to force doors open that are firmly shut. Life becomes an elegant dance rather than a bitter battle, a beautiful unfolding of possibilities that surprises and delights the heart at every turn. The search for happiness is often compared to a man looking for his keys under a streetlight, not because he lost them there, but simply because that is where the light happens to be brightest. People look for joy in the bright lights of fame, wealth, and sensual pleasure, because those are the areas celebrated by society, even though their true peace was dropped in the quiet, dark corners of inner reflection. It takes a certain amount of courage to turn away from the brightly lit streets, to walk into the quiet spaces of our own minds, and to face the stillness that resides there, free from external distractions. Yet, it is only in those quiet spaces that the missing keys can ever be found, waiting patiently exactly where they were left, completely untouched by the noise of the outside world. Once found, these keys open the doors to an inner fortress that can withstand any storm, providing a safe, warm haven for the soul throughout all the seasons of life. The beauty of the spiritual path is that it does not require everyone to become someone else, to change their personality, or to abandon their ordinary lives, but simply to bring a new quality of awareness to what they are already doing. A mother washing her child's face, a carpenter smoothing a piece of wood, a clerk typing on a keyboard, all can become acts of pure meditation when performed with full presence and a loving heart. There is no hierarchy of tasks in the eyes of true awareness, for a simple action done with love is far more spiritually resonant than a grand ceremony performed with a distracted, prideful mind. When everyone infuses their daily routines with this sacred attention, the dividing line between the ordinary and the spiritual disappears, turning the entire world into a temple of peace. Every breath becomes a prayer, every step becomes a pilgrimage, and every encounter becomes an opportunity to express the boundless kindness that resides at the core of human existence. A story from an ancient text describes a traveler who was walking across a vast, barren plain during the heat of summer, his throat parched, his limbs aching from the long hours of trekking under the blazing sun. He looked everywhere for a shady tree or a cool spring, but saw nothing but dry grass and cracked earth extending all the way to the shimmering horizon, filling his mind with a sense of utter despair. Just as his strength was about to fail him completely, he saw a small green patch in the distance, and hurrying toward it, he discovered a majestic banyan tree with wide, spreading branches that cast a deep, cool shadow over the ground. Beneath the tree sat a large earthenware pot filled to the brim with pure, cold water, left there by a kind soul for the benefit of any weary traveler who might pass by that lonely way. The traveler threw himself into the cool shade, drank deeply from the water pot, feeling the refreshing liquid revive his entire body, washing away the heat, the exhaustion, and the terrible anxiety that had gripped his heart. As he lay back against the smooth trunk of the banyan tree, listening to the gentle rustle of its leaves in the breeze, he felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude for the unknown person who had placed the water there. He realized that his life had been saved not by a miraculous intervention from the heavens, but by a simple act of human thoughtfulness, a quiet gesture of care that reached across time and space to comfort a stranger. This experience transformed the traveler's understanding of wealth, making him realize that the greatest value in life lies not in hoarding resources for oneself, but in creating spaces of shade and refreshment for others. When everyone begins to see themselves as providers of shade rather than consumers of resources, the entire dynamic of human society shifts from competition to cooperation, from fear to deep, abiding trust. The constant anxiety about whether we have enough, whether we are secure enough, or whether we are happy enough dissolves into a simple, joyful focus on making the path a little easier for those who walk beside us. This focus brings an immediate, profound sense of meaning that no material possession can ever replicate, anchoring the soul in a joy that is completely independent of personal fortune. It is the joy of alignment with the deepest truths of existence, a recognition that we are all interconnected parts of a single, magnificent whole, breathing the same air and sharing the same human heart. The illusion of separation is the root cause of all loneliness, the source of that painful feeling that we are isolated islands fighting against an indifferent or hostile ocean of circumstances. In reality, an island is not separate from the ocean floor, but is merely the visible peak of a vast mountain that connects deeply with the rest of the earth beneath the waves. When someone drops below the surface level of their individual thoughts, worries, and identities, they discover this profound interconnectedness, realizing that they are never truly alone, never separate from the flow of life. This discovery brings an end to the frantic search for external validation, replacing it with a quiet, unshakable confidence that comes from knowing we belong to the universe exactly as we are. The mind rests in this belonging, dropping its defenses, opening its doors wide to welcome the world with an affectionate, unreserved embrace. There is a sweet freedom in realizing that we do not have to be perfect to be at peace, that our flaws, our mistakes, and our vulnerabilities are part of the beautiful, messy landscape of being human. The pressure to present a flawless facade to the world is an exhausting burden that many people carry, hiding their true feelings behind a mask of constant happiness and unending success. This hiding creates a deep inner division, a sense of fraudulence that prevents them from experiencing genuine intimacy with others or true contentment within themselves. When someone has the courage to drop the mask, to acknowledge their struggles, and to greet their imperfections with gentle humor and self-compassion, the inner division heals instantly. They discover that they are loved not for their flawless performance, but for their authentic presence, which allows others to drop their masks as well, creating a space of real, heartfelt connection. The path to lasting peace is not a steep, grueling climb to the top of a distant mountain, but a simple, relaxed step backward into the quiet room of the present moment, which has always been open. It requires no special equipment, no advanced degrees, and no radical changes in external life, but merely a willingness to look at the world with fresh eyes, free from the distortions of expectation and desire. When the eyes are clear, every object, every person, and every situation reveals its inherent beauty, showing that the world is already full of wonder, waiting for everyone to notice it. The mind stops demanding that life change its tune, learning instead to listen to the current melody with a deep, appreciative silence that turns every note into a masterpiece of pure joy. In the ancient monasteries, the disciples were taught to treat every guest who arrived at the gate as a manifestation of the divine, whether they were a wealthy prince, a ragged beggar, a scholar, or a confused wanderer. They washed their feet, offered them the best food available, and listened to their stories with absolute attention, without judging their status or expecting anything in return. This practice was not just about hospitality, but about training the mind to see the sacred essence in every form, to break down the categories of important and unimportant that the intellect loves to create. When someone treats every moment, every breath, and every interaction as a sacred guest, their life becomes infused with a luminous dignity that elevates the most mundane tasks into acts of sublime beauty. The constant complaints about boredom, insignificance, and routine vanish completely, replaced by a steady, quiet enthusiasm for the simple act of living. This enthusiasm is not a loud, boisterous emotion that burns out quickly, but a steady, gentle flame that provides warmth and light through the darkest nights and the coldest winters of human experience. It is the resilience of a heart that has found its true home within itself, a home built on the solid foundations of mindfulness, gratitude, and boundless empathy for all living beings. This heart does not look for happiness in the next hour, the next day, or the next lifetime, because it knows that the fullness of existence is completely contained within the boundary of the current breath. It rests there, perfectly satisfied, perfectly still, watching the world go by with a smile of pure, unadulterated peace that requires nothing more than this very moment to be absolutely complete, letting the flow of life carry it forward into the next unfolding chapter with complete trust and effortless grace, as the sun moves across the sky without ever needing to hurry its pace or alter its natural path through the heavens, shining brightly on everyone without asking for anything in return. Casting its warm golden light over the entire landscape, touching every single leaf and stone with the exact same gentle care, waiting for nothing, wanting nothing, simply being what it is, a constant source of life and light for the entire world, just as a clear mind shines with its own natural radiance when the clouds of desire are allowed to drift away completely, revealing the sky that was always there, wide and free, spacious enough to contain all things without ever being stained or limited by them, resting in its own boundless nature, peaceful and undisturbed by the passing storms of time. The vast expanse of the open sky remains completely untroubled by the birds that fly through it, just as a heart grounded in deep awareness remains completely unbothered by the passing emotions of daily life. When people understand that thoughts are merely temporary visitors, like drifting clouds that appear for a moment and then dissolve into nothingness, they stop fighting their own minds, allowing everything to settle naturally. The frantic urge to fix every uncomfortable feeling, to chase away every shadow of sadness, or to force a state of constant cheerfulness is the very mechanism that keeps the inner waters muddy and turbulent. Peace is discovered not by creating a perfectly sanitized environment free from all difficult emotions, but by expanding the capacity of the heart to hold all things, both the light and the dark, with an embrace of complete kindness. This spaciousness allows everyone to breathe freely, knowing that whatever arises will also pass away, according to its own rhythm, leaving the core of our being completely untouched, clean, and beautifully intact. In the old records of the forest elders, there is a beautiful account of a young disciple who spent months trying to master the art of meditation, sitting cross-legged for hours until his knees ached, yet finding only frustration and a mind full of chaotic thoughts. He would constantly watch his breath, trying to force it to be deep and slow, counting each inhalation and exhalation with an intensity that made his forehead tight, his shoulders stiff, and his heart heavy with stress. One evening, seeing his struggle, an elder teacher led him to a small pond located behind the monastery garden, where the surface was completely covered with ripples because a brisk wind was blowing through the trees. The teacher threw a small pebble into the center of the water, creating even more rings of disruption, and asked the young man how he would go about making the water perfectly flat and still again so it could reflect the moon. The disciple, eager to show his dedication, suggested that he could get a flat board and gently press down on the ripples, or perhaps use his hands to smooth out the surface of the water, area by area, until it became as calm as glass. The elder teacher laughed softly, shook his head, and told the young man that if he were to do that, his hands and the board would only create more motion, causing the mud at the bottom to stir up, making the pond entirely cloudy and dark. The master explained that the only true way to make the water still is to leave it completely alone, to step back, to sit on the bank, and to let the wind die down naturally, because the water already knows how to return to its own calm state when it is not being disturbed by human effort. The young monk looked at the muddy pond, realized his own mind was exactly like that water, and for the first time in months, he let out a deep sigh of relief, dropping his shoulders, relaxing his gaze, and allowing himself to simply sit without any agenda. This letting go of the need to control is the great secret of a peaceful life, a shift from an attitude of constant manipulation to an attitude of deep, unconditional trust in the natural order of things. Most people are so busy trying to manage every detail of their lives, trying to make everyone like them, trying to prevent any mistakes, and trying to secure a future that is inherently unpredictable, that they completely exhaust their life energy. They become like a driver who holds the steering wheel so tightly that their arms ache, forgetting that the road itself is stable and that the vehicle is perfectly capable of moving forward with a lighter, more relaxed touch. When everyone learns to soften their grip on existence, allowing things to happen as they must, they discover a profound reservoir of energy that was previously wasted on unnecessary resistance and anxiety. The mind becomes clear, the vision sharpens, and a beautiful sense of ease infuses every simple action, turning the daily routine into a smooth, elegant dance with reality. A striking story from ancient times tells of a dedicated woodcutter who lived in a dense forest, a man who worked from sunrise to sunset, using a heavy iron axe to fell old trees, which he then carried to the local market to support his elderly parents. He prided himself on his incredible strength and endurance, boasted to his companions that he could chop down more timber in a single day than anyone else in the entire province, because he never took a break, never paused to rest, and never wasted a minute on idle conversation. Over the years, however, he began to notice a frustrating trend, that despite working even harder, waking up earlier, and swinging his axe with greater force, the number of trees he could cut down each week was steadily decreasing. He felt deeply bitter about this, blaming his aging body, blaming the hardness of the wood, and growing increasingly irritable, which cast a dark, gloomy shadow over his simple home. One afternoon, a wise old traveler who was walking through the forest saw the woodcutter sweating profusely, swinging his axe with all his might against a thick oak tree, yet making only a tiny, shallow dent in the trunk with each heavy blow. The traveler stopped, watched the exhausting effort for items, and gently suggested to the young man that he might want to stop for a few minutes to sharpen the blade of his axe, which looked incredibly blunt and rusted. The woodcutter, wiping the sweat from his eyes, replied angrily that he did not have a single moment to waste on sharpening axes, because he was already far behind on his daily quota, and stopping would only mean losing more precious time. The traveler smiled with deep compassion, pointed to the blunt edge of the iron, and explained that the time spent sharpening the tool is never wasted, because it multiplies the effectiveness of every single strike, allowing the work to be completed with a fraction of the effort. Human beings often live their lives exactly like that stubborn woodcutter, running from one task to another, managing crises, checking off lists, completely neglecting the condition of their own minds, which become blunt, dull, and heavy with accumulated stress. They believe that taking time to sit quietly, to reflect, to breathe, or to simply do nothing is a luxury they cannot afford, an unproductive waste of time in a world that demands constant, unending action. Yet, without these quiet spaces of renewal, the quality of everything they do begins to degrade, their patience wears thin, their creativity dries up, and their relationships suffer from a chronic lack of presence and genuine warmth. The practice of mindfulness is not an escape from daily responsibilities, but the essential process of sharpening the axe, restoring clarity, resilience, and joy to the mind so that it can engage with the world effectively. A sharp mind cuts through difficulties with ease, finds solutions where others see only walls, and remains light, open, and cheerful even in the midst of a demanding day. The habit of looking for fulfillment in things that are outside of ourselves is so deeply ingrained in human culture that it takes a conscious, deliberate effort to turn the gaze inward, to discover the wealth that has always been available within. People travel across oceans to see magnificent monuments, climb high peaks to witness beautiful views, and spend fortunes to experience unique sensations, all the while carrying a restless, dissatisfied heart inside their chests. They forget that a beautiful view is only beautiful because there is an eye capable of perceiving it, and a sweet melody is only sweet because there is an ear capable of receiving its rhythm. The beauty, the peace, and the joy are not properties of the external objects themselves, but are born in the sacred encounter between the world and a clear, appreciative mind. Therefore, the most magnificent destination on earth is the quiet sanctuary of our own presence, a place that requires no ticket, no packing, and no long hours of travel to reach. There is a touching chronicle of an ancient ruler who decided to build a magnificent hall of mirrors in the center of his capital, a structure made entirely of polished silver and crystal, designed to reflect the light of thousands of candles so brilliantly that it would look like a star on earth. When the construction was finished, the king walked into the hall alone at night, marveled at the dazzling beauty of the reflections, and felt a deep pride in his achievement, believing that he had created the most perfect place in the entire world. However, the next morning, a stray dog, hungry, tired, and terrified by the noise of the city, accidentally slipped past the palace guards and wandered into the great hall of mirrors. Finding himself suddenly surrounded by 1,000 dogs, the frightened animal froze, bared its teeth in defense, and began to growl loudly, trying to protect itself from the perceived threat. Instantly, 1,000 dogs in the mirrors bared their teeth and growled back at him, filling the room with an intense, terrifying image of hostility that completely panicked the poor creature. The dog began to bark furiously, jumping from side to side, attacking the air, and seeing 1,000 dogs attacking him with the exact same fury from every single direction, until he finally collapsed from utter exhaustion and terror, his heart breaking in the midst of a self-created nightmare. The Hall of Mirrors had no inherent anger, no hostility, and no desire to harm the dog, for it was merely a neutral surface reflecting back whatever image was brought into its space with absolute precision. If a happy child had walked into that room, smiling, dancing, and waving their hands, 1,000 happy children would have smiled, danced, and waved back, turning the space into a luminous celebration of pure joy. The world we inhabit behaves exactly like that magnificent hall of mirrors, reflecting back to everyone the precise quality of their own internal state, their own beliefs, and their own habitual thoughts. If a person walks through life with a heart full of suspicion, anger, and a belief that everyone is out to harm them, they will encounter conflict, hostility, and reasons to be angry at every single turn. On the other hand, if someone approaches the world with an open, kind, and compassionate heart, looking for opportunities to understand and help others, they will discover beauty, friendship, and reasons for gratitude in the most unexpected places. The external reality is not a fixed, independent entity that forces us to feel miserable or happy, but a fluid canvas that responds to our inner vibration, taking on the colors of our own thoughts. By transforming the quality of our inner landscape, we automatically transform the world we experience, turning a hostile battleground into a peaceful, supportive sanctuary where everyone can thrive. The teachings of the great sage always emphasize that true freedom is the freedom from our own internal reactivity, the ability to experience a situation without being immediately swept away by a wave of anger, desire, or fear. When someone is highly reactive, their happiness is entirely at the mercy of external conditions, making them like a puppet whose strings are pulled by the changing winds of praise and blame, gain and loss. If someone says a kind word, the puppet smiles. If someone offers criticism, the puppet falls into despair, living in a constant state of vulnerability that is incredibly draining. The path of mindfulness creates a beautiful, spacious gap between a stimulus and our response, a quiet arena where we can choose how to act with wisdom and dignity rather than reacting blindly out of old habits. In that gap lies the entire potential for human growth, the ability to meet a difficult word with a smile, to meet a loss with acceptance, and to meet a challenge with absolute clarity. There is an inspiring account of an old monk who lived in a small monastery near a busy trading route, a man known for his incredible patience and his total lack of pride, which drew many people to seek his advice. A proud young scholar, who had won many debates in the great universities and felt highly confident in his intellectual superiority, decided to visit the monk, intending to test his wisdom and expose him as a simpleton. The scholar arrived with a large entourage of students, walked into the quiet courtyard where the old man was watering some flowers, and immediately began to challenge him with complex philosophical riddles, using arrogant, condescending language to belittle the practice of simple mindfulness. He spoke for an hour, mocking the monk's lifestyle, criticizing his lack of formal academic training, and trying his best to provoke a reaction of anger or defensiveness from the quiet practitioner. The old monk listened to the entire tirade with absolute attention, his face relaxed, his eyes soft with a gentle warmth, nodding occasionally as if listening to the sweet song of a bird in the spring light. When the scholar finally stopped, gasping for breath, looking triumphant and waiting for a bitter retort, the old monk smiled gently, stood up, and asked him if he would care for a warm cup of herbal tea after his long, exhausting speech. The scholar was completely disarmed by this total lack of resistance, his anger evaporating instantly because there was no wall to strike against, leaving him standing in a space of absolute silence and profound self-reflection. He realized that the old man's wisdom was not a collection of clever words or logical arguments, but a living realization of peace that could not be shaken by any amount of external insult or arrogance. He bowed deeply, apologized for his rudeness, and sat down on the simple stone bench, ready to learn the true art of stillness from a master who practiced it with every single breath. This ability to remain undisturbed by the opinions of others comes from a deep, unshakable knowledge of one's own true nature, a recognition that praise and blame are merely passing whispers that carry no real substance. When someone knows who they are, when they are grounded in their own integrity and kindness, the judgments of the world lose their power to wound or to elevate, becoming as insignificant as dust on a coat. They no longer waste precious energy trying to defend an idealized image of themselves, nor do they look for validation from a crowd that changes its mind with every passing trend. This independence brings a wonderful lightness of being, allowing a person to walk through life with an open heart, offering their gifts freely to the world without expecting anything in return, content with the simple joy of doing what is right and kind. Life becomes incredibly simple when we stop living for the approval of others, focusing instead on the quality of our own presence and the depth of our compassion. The pursuit of pleasure is often confused with the realization of happiness, yet the two are fundamentally different in their nature, their duration, and their effect on the human soul. Pleasure is a brief, intense spark that arises from the gratification of a sensory desire, like eating a delicious sweet, buying a new item of clothing, or receiving a compliment from a friend. It depends entirely on external stimuli, burns out quickly, and often leaves behind a subtle trail of craving, a desire for more, or a fear of the moment when the sensation will inevitably end. Happiness, on the other hand, is a steady, quiet light that glows from within, a state of deep contentment that does not require any specific external condition to sustain its warmth. It is the peace of a mind that is at rest with itself, a heart that is full of gratitude for the simple fact of existence, a joy that can coexist even with physical discomfort or life's inevitable challenges. In the ancient descriptions of the spiritual path, there is a helpful metaphor of a traveler who was walking across a vast desert, carrying a heavy leather canteen filled with sweet, fresh water to sustain him through the hot journey. As he walked under the burning sun, he became thirsty, took a small sip from his canteen, felt an immediate sense of relief and pleasure, and carefully closed the container to preserve the precious liquid. A few hours later, a sudden windstorm arose, swirling the hot sand around him, causing him to lose his direction, and in his panic, he dropped his canteen, which split open on a sharp stone, allowing all the water to pour out into the dry sand. The traveler was struck with absolute terror, believing that without that specific water, he was doomed to perish in the wilderness, and he threw himself on the damp ground, weeping for his lost treasure. Just then, a nomadic guide who knew the desert perfectly rode up on a strong camel, saw the weeping traveler, and told him to stand up, because there was a beautiful, ancient well hidden just behind the next sand dune, a well that had been flowing with sweet water for hundreds of years. The guide explained that the water in the canteen was merely a tiny, limited portion drawn from that vast underground spring, and that losing the container was actually a blessing, because it forced him to look for the true source that could never run dry. The traveler climbed the dune, saw the stone well surrounded by green palms, drank deeply from the overflowing bucket, and realized that his fear had been born out of his ignorance of the vast wealth that lay hidden beneath the surface of the land. The water in the canteen represents the temporary pleasures of the senses, which people guard with so much anxiety, while the hidden well represents the infinite reservoir of peace that resides within the human heart, waiting to be discovered through the practice of inward stillness. When everyone stops clinging to the tiny droplets of temporary pleasure, they open up the possibility of discovering the great well of internal joy, a source that remains constant through all the changing seasons of life. This shift does not mean that one must reject the pleasures of the world, or look at them with a cold, puritanical disdain, but rather that one should enjoy them for what they are, without demanding that they provide a permanent sense of security. A beautiful meal, a comfortable bed, a pleasant conversation, all these can be enjoyed fully in the moment, with deep gratitude, without turning them into addictions that dictate our internal peace. When the mind is free from attachment, it can welcome these gifts when they arrive, and let them go without regret when they pass away, remaining anchored in its own deep well of contentment. This freedom is the true mark of spiritual maturity, a state of balance that allows a person to participate fully in the world while remaining completely untethered by its fluctuations. The habit of comparison is one of the most destructive patterns of the human intellect, a mechanism that instantly poisons the current moment with a sense of insufficiency and lack. People rarely look at their blessings in isolation, but instead choose to view them through the lens of what others possess, turning a perfectly good life into an experience of chronic poverty. A person might feel completely happy with their simple car, until they see a colleague drive up in a sleek, luxurious model, and suddenly, their reliable vehicle feels like a source of shame and irritation. This constant looking to the side creates a perpetual state of envy, a feeling that we are always falling behind, always missing out on something better, which prevents us from ever settling down into what we actually have. The truth is that everyone is walking a completely unique path, with their own set of challenges, lessons, and blessings, and comparing our internal chapters to someone else's external facade is an exercise in total illusion. There is a charming story about a small crow who lived in a green forest, completely satisfied with his life, flying through the trees, eating wild berries, and singing his loud, rough songs every morning. One day, he flew over a large lake and saw a beautiful white swan swimming gracefully on the water, her feathers looking as pure and clean as the fresh winter snow. The crow looked at his own black feathers, felt a sudden wave of ugliness and inferiority, and thought to himself that the swan must be the happiest bird in the entire universe because of her stunning appearance. He flew down, landed on a branch near the swan, and expressed his deep admiration, telling her how blessed she was to be so white, beautiful, and admired by everyone who walked past the lake. The swan sighed softly, shook her head, and replied that she used to think she was the happiest bird on earth, until she saw a colorful parrot that lived in a golden cage in the king's palace gardens. She explained that the parrot had two distinct, vibrant colors, bright green and brilliant red, whereas she had only one plain, boring white color, which made her feel incredibly simple and uninteresting by comparison. The crow, intrigued by this answer, flew to the royal gardens, found the parrot's cage, and told him that his multicolored feathers must make him the most joyful creature alive. The parrot looked out through the golden bars with eyes full of deep sadness, and said that his beautiful colors were actually his curse, because they caused humans to capture him, lock him in a small cage, and rob him of his freedom to fly through the open sky. The parrot added that he had spent days looking at the wild crows flying freely over the palace walls, wishing with his whole heart that he could be a plain black crow, free to go wherever he pleased without anyone ever trying to catch him. This simple forest fable beautifully illustrates how everyone is often looking at someone else with envy, wishing for their appearance, their status, or their fortune, completely unaware of the burdens and limitations that come with those very things. The person who seems to have a perfect life from the outside may be carrying an unbearable weight of loneliness, pressure, and anxiety behind closed doors, wishing for the simple, unburdened freedom of someone else. When everyone learns to drop the habit of comparison, focusing instead on cultivating their own unique garden, they discover the exquisite beauty of their own life, exactly as it is. A rose does not try to look like a lotus, nor does an oak tree try to bear the fruit of a mango, for each creature fulfills its own purpose beautifully by simply being what it is, without any desire to be anything else. True joy comes from this absolute self-acceptance, a relaxed alignment with our own nature, a recognition that we are already a complete, perfect expression of life's infinite creativity. The rush to achieve success often creates a deep inner hardness, a state of chronic tension where every person and every situation is evaluated solely based on how they can help us reach our goals. People become blind to the soft, subtle details of existence, passing by the beauty of a flower, the kind smile of a stranger, or the warmth of a quiet afternoon, because their minds are fixed on an imaginary finish line. This goal-oriented mindset turns life into a series of obstacles to be overcome, a stressful marathon where there is never any time to slow down, to breathe, or to simply enjoy the scenery along the way. When someone achieves their long-sought success, they often find that the feeling of triumph is incredibly short-lived, fading into boredom or an even greater pressure to maintain their position, leaving them as restless as before. True success is not a destination at the end of a long, grueling journey, but the quality of awareness we bring to each step of the journey itself, a capacity to find fulfillment in the process rather than the outcome. In the old collections of monastic wisdom, there is an account of an elderly monk who was tasked with maintaining the stone pathways of a large temple situated on a misty mountain slope. He had been doing this humble work for 40 years, replacing broken tiles, clearing away the wild moss, and sweeping the steps every morning before the sun rose over the eastern peaks. A young visitor, who was full of ambition and intellectual curiosity, watched the old man working so carefully, adjusting a single stone with a small hammer until it fit perfectly into the earth, looking completely absorbed in his task. The young man approached him, asked why he spent so much energy on a simple path that would only be stepped on by dirty shoes, and whether he ever felt frustrated that his life was passing away without any grand achievements or recognition. The old monk stopped his work, wiped his brow with a clean cloth, looked at the young man with eyes full of clear, vibrant light, and said that for him, the path was not a means to get somewhere else, but a living expression of his respect for all who walked upon it. He explained that when he smoothed a stone, he was smoothing the path for a tired traveler, when he cleared the moss, he was preventing a child from slipping, and in doing so, his heart found a complete, satisfying fulfillment with every single tile he touched. He added that he did not look for a reward at the end of the path, because the act of creating safety and beauty for others was itself the greatest reward he could ever dream of receiving. The young man realized that the old monk had found a supreme peace not by doing extraordinary things, but by doing ordinary things with an extraordinary amount of love, presence, and simple devotion. This shift from self-centered ambition to a spirit of loving service is the great alchemy of the spiritual life, a transformation that instantly melts away the heavy icicles of isolation and chronic dissatisfaction. When a person's focus changes from what they can extract from life to what they can offer to life, their inner space becomes wide, bright, and completely immune to the small miseries of egoism. They no longer worry about whether they are being appreciated enough, whether they are famous enough, or whether they are winning, because their joy comes from the simple act of contributing to the well-being of the world around them. This joy is indestructible, because there are always opportunities to be kind, always a path to be smoothed, always a heavy burden to be lightened, and always a warm smile to be shared with a lonely heart. It anchors the soul in a steady, reliable wealth that does not depend on the state of the economy, the political climate, or the approval of society. The practice of mindfulness is often misunderstood as a passive withdrawal from the world, a state of cold indifference where one sits on a mountain top, unconcerned with the joys and sorrows of humanity. In reality, true mindfulness leads to an intense, vibrant engagement with life, an opening of the heart so wide that it can feel the heartbeat of the universe itself, responding to every situation with spontaneous empathy and appropriate action. When the mind is still, free from the noise of its own judgments and prejudices, it can listen to others with an absolute presence that is deeply healing in its own right. People do not always need clever advice, complex theories, or material gifts to feel comforted, for often, the greatest gift we can offer is the simple, unreserved presence of an attentive ear and an understanding heart. This quiet attention creates a safe sanctuary where others can drop their defenses, heal their wounds, and discover their own inner resilience. There is a beautiful story about an ancient village that was hit by a severe drought, causing the fields to dry up, the rivers to stop flowing, and the hearts of the people to fill with a terrible, dark despair. The villagers gathered in the central square, arguing furiously about whose fault the disaster was, performing elaborate ceremonies, and demanding that the heavens open up to save them from starvation. In the midst of this chaos, a quiet woman, who lived in a tiny hut at the edge of the forest and spent her days spinning wool and looking after abandoned animals, did not join the noisy debates or the frantic rituals. Instead, she took a large wooden bucket, walked down to the deep ravine where a tiny, hidden spring was still dripping water drop by drop through the rocks, and began to patiently collect the precious liquid, one drop at a time. She spent hours in the hot sun, waiting for the bucket to fill, then she carried it back to the village, using the water to revive the dying vegetable gardens of her elderly neighbors, to give a drink to the thirsty children, and to keep the animals alive. Seeing her quiet, steady work, a few other villagers stopped arguing, took their own buckets, and joined her at the ravine, and soon, a continuous line of people was moving back and forth, working in a silent harmony that completely transformed the atmosphere of the community. The rain did not fall immediately, the drought did not end overnight, yet the despair vanished entirely, replaced by a deep sense of solidarity, meaning, and mutual care that made the hardship completely bearable. The quiet woman did not give a speech, did not demand obedience, yet her simple, practical compassion showed everyone that instead of cursing the darkness, one can always light a small candle, turning a shared crisis into a beautiful revelation of human goodness. This story teaches everyone that when we stop waiting for a macro solution to our problems, focusing instead on the simple good we can do in our immediate surroundings, we regain our power and our peace. True happiness is not a life completely free from external difficulties, but a life where difficulties are met with an active, creative kindness that refuses to surrender to bitterness or despair. When someone chooses to be a source of comfort, stability, and light for others, they discover that their own burdens become remarkably light, as if carried by a powerful, invisible wind of grace. The small worries of the self dissolve in the vast ocean of collective well-being, leaving the heart clean, strong, and deeply content with its place in the grand tapestry of existence. This is the peace that passes all understanding, a joy that cannot be stolen by any circumstance, a light that shines brightest in the dark. The tendency to dwell on past mistakes, to replay old regrets like a broken record in the mind, is another major source of internal friction that prevents the sweetness of the present from touching the soul. Many people carry a heavy bag of old grievances, blaming themselves for choices made years ago, or holding on to anger toward those who have wronged them in the past. This clinging to what is gone is like a person who insists on carrying the muddy shoes they wore yesterday into their clean bedroom, making the current space dirty and uncomfortable for no good reason. The past is a shadow that exists only in the memory, a closed book that cannot be rewritten, and using the precious energy of today to fight with the events of yesterday is an exercise in total futility. True wisdom lies in learning the lessons that the past had to offer, letting go of the heavy baggage with a deep breath, and stepping into the fresh reality of the current moment with a clean slate. In the old accounts of the desert travelers, it is told that a guide once led a group of people through a narrow canyon where the rock walls were so high that the path below was entirely in deep, cold shadow. One of the travelers spent the entire walk looking backward, complaining about the rough stones he had tripped over an hour ago, feeling angry at the guide for choosing such a difficult route, and worrying that his boots would be ruined. Because his eyes were fixed on the path behind him, he failed to notice that just a few steps ahead, the canyon walls opened up into a spectacular, sunlit valley filled with green palms and flowing springs of fresh water. He stumbled right into the clearing, still grumbling about the old rocks, completely missing the breathtaking beauty of the oasis that was welcoming him with all its abundance and warmth. Most people walk through the sunlit valleys of their lives with their eyes fixed on the cold shadows of the past, missing the miracles that are unfolding in front of them because their minds are entangled in old stories. When someone has the courage to forgive themselves for their ignorance and to forgive others for their human flaws, they cut the thick ropes that tie them to the dead past, allowing themselves to float up into the clean, open air of the present. Forgiveness is not about condoning harmful behavior or forgetting the lessons learned, but about reclaiming our own life energy from the ghosts of yesterday, choosing to live fully in the only moment that actually exists. It is an act of pure kindness to oneself, a profound liberation that allows the heart to beat with a fresh, youthful joy once again, free from the heavy rust of resentment. The nature of life is a continuous movement, a fluid stream that never stops flowing, changing shape, and presenting new landscapes to the traveler with every single turn of the river. Trying to freeze a specific moment, trying to make a pleasant experience last forever, or trying to prevent any change from occurring is like trying to hold a handful of smoke, an effort that leads only to frustration and disappointment. True peace comes from developing a mind that can flow with this movement, a mind that is flexible, adaptable, and ready to welcome whatever each new bend in the river brings with balance and curiosity. When someone drops their strict expectations of how life should be, they discover that life is actually much more creative, beautiful, and surprising than any plan their small intellect could have ever constructed. They become like a leaf floating on the surface of a clear stream, moving effortlessly with the current, trusting the water to carry it safely to its destination without any struggle or panic. The search for happiness ends precisely where it began, in the simple recognition that what we have been tracking down across continents, through books, and across decades has been sitting quietly inside our own chests the entire time. It is the natural radiance of our own awareness when it is not clouded by desire, the natural warmth of our own heart when it is not hardened by fear, and the natural clarity of our own mind when it is not cluttered by unnecessary thoughts. When everyone stops sprinting toward an imaginary future, stopping their frantic efforts to accumulate, to compare, and to control, they drop right into this internal paradise, discovering that they are already home. The door is always open, the well is always flowing, and the sky is always wide and free, waiting for everyone to simply step inside, to take a deep, relaxed breath, and to rest in the perfect fullness of this very moment, allowing the soft river of peace to wash over them completely, filling every corner of their being with a quiet, unshakable joy that requires nothing outside of itself to be absolutely complete, beautiful, and forever whole.